Good morning, students. This is Dr. Winkler again. This is for the History 151G Modern Civilization class. And this is the lecture I think I would normally have delivered. Let's look at the calendar, probably on Thursday, April 2nd. Let me clarify something. As you can well imagine, I am technically challenged. So I do have a few problems here, one of which is this, that as I am teaching ancient civilization courses, and I'm also teaching this modern civilization class. And when I'm done recording these things, I have to place a statement as to what class this is for. And I've become confused. Sometimes I'm having an ancient civilization lecture and I put it under 151G, and sometimes modern civilization lecture, and I have it under ancient civilization. To be completely sure what we're talking about, make sure that you look at the far right of these. In other words, when I'm talking about the Irish potato famine, like today I'm talking about World War I. In reality, that will not be a problem as far as every other number there, everything else I put. That will not be confused with Roman history, for example. So please be aware of that. And I think this is the fourth lecture that I'm recording since we actually began this process. So let me wish you a nice day. Hope you're having a wonderful day. And let's start discussing modern civilization. Last time we were talking about the background of World War I. Remember, I made a big deal about studying that World War I sets off the era, the violent century, in which many tragedies take place and many human lives are lost. I was talking about the economic and colonial rivalries, the reasons why we go to war. The best answer to this is it really doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm going to argue throughout this lecture that there are times when the various powers could have done something different. They could have made different decisions. Maybe the bottom line is people did not fear war enough. They thought that it might be glorious and quick. A lot of people knew better than that. On the other hand, there wasn't enough people out there to say, we're not going to war, let's stop, to actually get the entire process slowed down or stopped entirely. Well, we talk about nationalism, education system. You want your nation to be nationalistic. One of the major reasons for this is you want your young men to serve in the military and you want people to gladly pay their taxes. I talked about militarism, one of the next steps, in which you put military values into society. And one of the examples of this is the Boy Scouts. We take 12-year-old boys and you teach them many of the skills they're going to need a few years later when they're actually in the military. Arms races, quality, quantity. Who's pressing for this? Well, governments press for it. But remember, the industrialists, the people that are there to make money from these enormous contracts, are saying, well, we need more. And I already mentioned that the German and British naval races, which doesn't really make sense. Germany's never going to have a large enough navy to really threaten the British, but the British do feel threatened. And it costs enormous amounts of money for Britain and Germany to continually build up their their navies. My next step in the discussion was to talk about the alliance system. You see, I have to have an explanation here. Let's look at Europe once again, 1914, if I can type it correctly. Some things we need to have an explanation for. For example, the actual war starts because of an assassination, which took place in the Balkans. This time I do want to show you how the alliances worked out. Actually, this is incorrect because this is actually as it went to war. But I want to look at the alliances before the war started, and I still don't have that up there. I will try alliances and see if I can get what I'm looking for. Should be one there. I'm not seeing it though. Okay. This does work. Okay. What I'm trying to explain is this. We have an affair down here in the Balkans, and there are a number of countries that have interest in the Balkans. Italy has interest, Austria-Hungary has interest, Russia has interest in the Balkans. But within a matter of hours, I'm exaggerating, a matter of days, a few days after the affair starts down here, in reality, Britain becomes involved. That takes a little bit of explanation because Britain has absolutely no interest, either politically, socially, or economically, in the Balkans at all. One of the few ways you can explain this is that the alliance system got various nations involved quite rapidly. A natural alliance might be something like this: the United States and Canada. The United States and Canada have been at peace since the War of 1812, in other words, over 200 years. And except for the Quebecois, the people who speak French, we speak English. We share a border which has not been fortified for a very lengthy period of time, and we do share some institutions. You know, we both came from Britain, so we have a lot of similarities. If we had an alliance with Canada, which we do under NATO, that would be a natural alliance. We would think so. So let's look at Germany and Austria. Is this a natural alliance? In many respects, it is. The language of most Germans is, in fact, German. The ruling clique, the most powerful group of people in Austria, speak German. They speak Austrian German, but they certainly can understand each other. Now, there are many other nationalities involved here, but these people share a boundary, they share cultural heritage, and they share a language. So we can say perhaps this is a natural alliance. I haven't explained exactly why you want an alliance. Maybe I should get into that as well. Wars sometimes can be quick. There are examples in European history, which I've already mentioned, 1864, 1866, and 1870. You get a war started very rapidly, and very fortunately for those wars, they end quite quickly as well. The issue is this: when you start a war, isn't it a lot better to have all your friends lined up? That's a lot better than waiting, isn't it? To figure out what they're doing. The alliance system was actually started by Germany under Bismarck, Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor. And he wants an alliance so he's always got friends. See, Germany's in a precarious situation. Of all the nations of the world, it shares actually more boundaries with other countries than any other. And it is sandwiched between powerful neighbors. Wouldn't it be better for them if you had a power block right here to essentially make sure that the Russians and the French do not make too much trouble for them? There was an opportunity when these alliances were worked out that Germany actually could have gotten an alliance, at least we think they could have, with Russia. Russia was interested in this. But Bismarck didn't want to do this. He said in an alliance, there's a horse and there's a rider. He did not want to have the dominance of Germany questioned at all. In other words, he didn't want to be the horse, he wanted to be the rider. In an alliance with a powerful nation, such as Russia, in reality, he would have been, well, who knows who would have been the horse and who would have been the rider. An alliance with Austria, Germany's clearly more powerful than Austria. So in this case, we got the horse and the rider. Some of these issues are unnatural. An unnatural alliance would be somebody you don't like, some people you don't get along with. And the example of this is Italy. Italy joins the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. But this is not natural. The Italians hate the Austrians with a passion. The Austrians had dominated northern Italy for many, many years, for many decades. And in fact, they were a hindrance to the unification of Italy. And Italy was only unified after 1866, when Austria was kicked out of Italy after they were beaten by the Germans in the war, Austro-Prussian War, in 1866. Well, but why would you be in an alliance then? You don't like these people? In fact, Italy still thinks they should own more land over here, which they'd have to take at Austria's expense. What we're actually seeing here is a little bit of getting even. Let's go back and look at our map of colonial Africa. Oh, if I can get it up here. And maybe I can get enough clarity. Notice in this map, it's not as good as I hoped it would be. Can you see there's Italy right up here, Sicily and Italy? Well, I'll try it one more time. As the nations of Europe are carving up Africa, notice what we have here. We have Italy, and Italy's coming down here. Of course, Sicily's part of Italy, as you all know. You would think, as the Europeans carve up Italy, the logical thing to do was for Italy to be able to take what you and I call Tunisia, right over here. I mean, it's just right there. I mean, everybody knows, do they not, that this should belong to Italy. But the French don't know that, so the French take it. Now the Italians are very upset about this. Well, you rats, you shouldn't have done this to us. Italy does get Libya down here, but they should have had Tunisia, and France grabs it. To teach those doggone Frenchmen a lesson. We will now join an alliance against them with, get back over here, with Germany. This is more or less sulking. Can we say in an unnatural alliance, the person who is probably shouldn't be in this alliance can be the one that's least trusted. And when war begins, Italy does not join with Germany and Austria-Hungary. They declare themselves neutral in 1914. In 1915, they join with the Entente over here to fight against Austria. So, unnatural alliance. So essentially the alliance is just simply right here. Well, the Triple Entente. France goes into an alliance with Russia. This is the Entente, the agreement. Well, we can say this is an enormous coup for France. France is bitter enemies with Germany, particularly after they were defeated in the Franco-Prussian War, and they want some land back like Alsace, which the Germans took from France. Even though the Alsatians speak German, the French say they are part of Germany. It shouldn't be, they're part of France, and we have to have them back. A good question is, why would Russia go in for this? If there was a war between Germany and France, which seems likely, that in reality, the Russians, if the Russians are in an alliance, then they have to come in. But if they're not in an alliance, they can still threaten to come in, or come in if it is in their best interests. So the alliance actually ties them down, but they clearly do have a friend. After this alliance, France starts pumping a lot of money into Russia. And Russia is industrializing, but its rail system is really not strong enough to get a large numbers of men over to face Russia. So you face Germany, I said that wrong. So the French are giving a lot of money. We call them loans, but the condition of the loans are so large, so long, I should say. The interest is so low. In fact, it's free money to build this rail system to be able to more thoroughly threaten Germany. Another very interesting aspect of the Entente, becomes a triple Entente, is Britain and France are not traditional allies. In fact, going way back to the Middle Ages, they fought each other. The 100 Years' War, which starts in the 14th century, ends in the 15th century, is a lengthy war between France and England. So why would Britain come into this kind of alliance? Well, Britain has a very large navy, but its army is quite small relative to these others. And it holds these large colonial holdings both in Asia and in Africa. Britain realizes that in order to maintain their colonies in Asia and Africa, that they're going to have the cooperation of both Russia and France. So this is a major reason why they come in. Of course, another one is they're quite upset because Germany is building this navy, which they believe is a threat to them. So you see France and Russia join an alliance in 1894. Britain joins in 1904. Well, the unstable area of Europe is the Balkans. Can I get a map of the Balkans here? Whoa, this is the modern Balkans. How about the Balkans in 1914? It's an unstable area for a number of reasons. Sometimes we actually call it the shatter belt because it is there's a large number of nationalities that exist in this area, and there are Muslims living here, there are Eastern Orthodox living here, there are Catholics living here. So we actually have a shattering, if you will, of different nationalities, a very large number of those, and different religions. So what had happened is sometimes we call Turkey the sick old man of Europe. Turkey, I don't see a map which I'm liking very much, but Turkey had actually controlled large sections of the Balkans going back literally since the 16th century. Because it's a sick old man of Europe, these various nationalities, a whole bunch of them here, push out Turkey. And Turkey's finally forced down to this narrow neck on the European side of the Bosporus, which is right here. Well, which nation, which nationality, which people should control which areas according to these new states? That's one of the reasons why it's so volatile. Bismarck once said that the next war would start with some, quote, damned foolish thing in the Balkans. Well, yeah, the area is unstable. As long as the Europeans, I should have said this wrong, as long as the major states like Austria, Hungary, and Russia stay out of here, then these peoples can squabble among themselves. But when you get bigger areas involved, when you get bigger powers involved, then a local disagreement can end up being quite a major disaster. Well, there's an area down here. I don't know if you can see it on this map. Let me look a little closer. It is not here. But anyway, Bosnia-Herzegovina is right in here. We can see Bosnia on this map. And for many years after the Turks were pushed out, the Austro-Hungarians have been dominating this. However, in 1908, they decide to annex it outright, just simply take it over. Not terribly surprising they would do that because they're already really controlling it. However, there's a nation right here, a brand new nation called Serbia. And Serbia thinks that there's a lot of Serbians over in Bosnia. And what they want to do is to have that in their state. And there's a big crisis in 1908. Bosnia and Herzegovina right here. Oh, well, that's helpful. This area, which I'm always talking about. Well, Serbia wants it. And if they can figure out a way of getting it, they certainly will do so. Any event, there's squabbles. I was just making a big deal over this. The squabbles in the Balkans between the various nations. And they've kicked Turkey out, another squabble among themselves. Let's see if I can get you kind of an idea what's going on. Maps are a little bit complicated here. Nonetheless, I don't know what that's showing us. Nonetheless, we're fighting back and forth. 1913, the Second Balkan War, is actually the shorter of the two, when virtually everybody, Romania, Serbia included, to a certain extent, Greece involved as well, picks on Bulgaria. Bulgaria has quite an experience. It lost the Second Balkan War, it lost the First World War, and it lost the Second World War. So virtually everybody and all the neighbors nearby that wants a piece of Bulgaria's got a piece of Bulgaria. And of the nations now in the Balkans, it is virtually the only nation today that does not have a significant minority are a significant minority problem. There are some gypsies that live there, but almost everybody there is in fact Bulgarian. Well, I digress a little bit. So the Serbians want Bosnia. And the heir to the throne, the man who is in line to become the Emperor of Austria-Hungary, is Francis Ferdinand. The man who's ruling Austria-Hungary is 84 years old. That's way past his life expectancy. He's certainly going to die and die fairly soon. Well, we know in retrospect that he does die. This is 1916, so he dies 2 years later. However, he's virtually on his deathbed, and everybody knows that. So the man who is actually going to rule is Francis Ferdinand. There's really no question about this. There is an assassination group in Serbia we call the Black Hand. And the Black Hand has been killing leaders in Serbia they don't like. In fact, they killed the king and queen of Serbia. I believe it was 1905. Actually disemboweled the bodies and threw the bodies out into the courtyard. And can we say that the parliament of Serbia is a little nervous about these people? If they can kill the king and queen, well, maybe they can start knocking them off as well. Any event, the idea here from the Black Hand is to destabilize Austria and also bring on a cause of a war. You say, wait a minute, if Austria-Hungary fights Serbia, who's going to win? Well, Austria-Hungary is by far the biggest power, so it'll certainly win. The only way you can get an advantage out of this is if you can get somebody else involved. And even though they don't know this would happen, that maybe Russia could come in and stabilize the situation. Gavrilo Princip is suffering from tuberculosis. He's going to die. As you can see, he's only 20 years of age at this time frame. And he's only going to live for 4 more years. He dies in prison. He's got nothing loose. He's going to die anyway. There's a number of assassination groups. A number of people in the assassination group. And they get training from Serbia. They get their weapons from Serbia. Their pistols, their bombs, and their poisons. You see, if they are caught in the assassination attempt and they kill themselves, then there's no way that the Austrians can get information from them as to their collaboration with Serbia for this assassination. Now the question is, it's never really been answered. How much did the Serbian government know? In fact, they knew there was going to be an assassination attempt. They probably didn't know enough, didn't do enough to try to stop it. And another issue here, of course, is did these assassins do this with their knowledge and consent? Now that has never really been answered. We'll come back to that in just 1 minute. Okay, Francis Ferdinand, nice guy. He's trying to be a nice guy. He wants to have everybody believe that he is happy with Bosnia being here. He tries to give them more money for schools and roads, infrastructure. Serbia doesn't like this because they think that, well, if you bribe these people long enough, maybe they'll be happy living with the Austrians and won't become part of Serbia. So there's military maneuvers taking place in Bosnia this time frame. And Francis Ferdinand comes down with his wife, Sophie, to observe. The route of these, maybe I get this. Sasej Archduke, if I can get up here. And there is a road, I don't see a map here, but going down, there's a road that the Archduke and his entourage, other people with him, including his wife, will take. And it's announced in the newspaper, so there's no question about where they're going to be. The assassins line up along the road. And as the assassins, as the people come down, The assassins have pistols, they have bombs, a guy throws a bomb. It bounces in by the car that Francis Ferdinand and his wife Sophie are driving in. We have two accounts. One account says it bounced off the windshield and bounced away. Another account is that the Archduke himself batted it away with his hand. It does not go off hurting them, but it falls next to the car coming behind them, and there are a number of people injured. Well, they keep on driving down. They are met by the mayor. By this time, Francis Ferdinand is a little bit upset. There's been an assassination attempt. That makes you very nervous. And then you would think that there'd be more assassins around. There clearly were. So why don't you just get out of town as fast as you can? Good idea. Except Francis Ferdinand wanted to stop by the hospital where these other people had been injured by the bomb, and he wants to be the nice guy and go in and thank them and give them his best wishes. That becomes the problem because the driver of their vehicle thinks that they're simply going to head out of town. But the entourage essentially starts turning right. He thinks they're supposed to go straight. He's starting to go straight, and he realizes that people are supposed to turn. He stops the car. Depending on which account you want to read, some people say that he was trying to get the thing into reverse to get back. Another account which I read said he probably didn't have reverse in the vehicle. In either case, it doesn't matter because in his trying to maneuver the vehicle stops dead in the street, right in front of this revolutionary Gavrilo Princip. He pulls out his .38 revolver, bam, bam, gets off 2 shots. He said later on he wasn't trying to kill Sophie. He was trying to kill a man that was nearby. I believe it was one of the officials in the city. Be that as it may, he's a lousy shot, but a lucky shot. The bullet actually went through Sophie, through her abdomen, and cutting veins, and she died almost instantly. She died very rapidly. The other shot went through the neck of Francis Ferdinand. It cut the jugular vein. He turns to Sophie. He says, "Don't die. Live for the children." She's dead. She dies almost on the spot. They immediately try to rush him to the hospital. He's bleeding out. And the one man said to him, "Your Royal Majesty, are you in pain?" He says, "Oh, it's nothing." That's the last thing he said because he bled to death. He died. So this poorly orchestrated assassination attempt was much more successful than anyone thought. Well, we have photographs here. I'd like to show you one where actually on the spot people grabbed him. The police grabbed him. Here's Princip, grabbed him almost immediately. There's no chance for him to get away. The other assassins are grabbed as well. One guy took the poison. It was not strong enough, so he simply threw it up. And one of the assassins jumped in the river to drown himself. It's only 2 or 3 feet deep, so he was unsuccessful in that. They're captured. And now, of course, they're going to be interrogated. So, assassination in Sarajevo, as you can see here, on June 28th, 1914. Well, it takes a few days for them to break him down. They don't use torture. They break down Princip, and they finally get, a few days later, a week or so later, they get a confession from him. Well, yes, I did get training from the Serbians. Yes, I got my weapons from the Serbians. Yes, Serbian officials actually smuggled me across the border from Serbia into Bosnia. We have reason to believe, therefore, that Serbia might be duplicitous. Was Serbia involved? Like I say, it's never really been answered. But can we say they act guilty? Rather than making an investigation, we know people in our country are involved. Let's see who is involved. Let's arrest the people, make sure the people that were involved are punished. Let's see in which direction it goes. Quite frankly, there's no investigation. There's none at all. Like, hey, we killed your next in line to the throne, and tough. That doesn't come across very well. Later on in the crisis, I'm jumping ahead a few weeks, Austria-Hungary will send an ultimatum to Serbia and say, look, here's your 10 points. We're going to go to war in 48 hours unless you respond to these things positively. Now, some of these things were like, are you going to change? Let's change your school system. Your people teach bad math in us in your schools. Change that. Well, the Serbians could say, sure, we'll change that. But it might not really change anything. The most important one, however, is that since you people will not run your own investigation, the Austro-Hungarians say, look, you're going to have to allow us to come into your country, and we are going to oversee and become involved in the investigation as to who, in fact, is guilty. And the Serbians refuse. They say, well, this is an insult to our national integrity. Well, but if you're innocent, who cares? If you're innocent, well, sure, come in. You can talk to anybody you want to talk to. This is commonly done between nations. We very frequently, usually they're friendly nations, but usually you have people that come in for training and those kind of things. So I think saying this is a blow to the national integrity is really something of exaggeration. They're acting guilty. Ask yourself a question. What would you do if you knew a foreign country had killed your president? Let's go back to 1963. Yeah, I'm an old guy. I remember it. I remember it very well. It was on my 14th birthday. John Kennedy is down in Dallas driving through, and he's assassinated, shot through the head, and blows his brains out. Well, over the years, there's been numerous conspiracy theories. My goodness, the mafia did it. The Secret Service did it. The Cubans did it. There's been so many theories, I'm not even sure I didn't do it. But one of the fingers was pointed toward Cuba, that Cuba was behind this. The United States is very upset. We are very upset. I remember the first things I thought when John Kennedy was assassinated, that we would be in war in 6 months, because I believe that a foreign power would be involved. Had it been proven, had it been known that Cuba or anybody else, any other nation, had been involved in this assassination, I can guarantee you that we would have been at war. In fact, if it had been Cuba, I can also guarantee you that Cuba would have been a wasteland, that we would have actually obliterated it and invaded it had we known if Cuba was involved. Would we expect, therefore, Austria-Hungary to look at this situation and say, oh, by the way, it doesn't matter? No, we would expect them to take action. Well, before you're going to take action, why don't you talk to your friends? Let's line up your friends, who they are. Well, we have an alliance with Germany, but that doesn't mean that Germany will come in, even though they're obligated to do so. So the Austrians appeal to Germans, and the Germans say, well, you need to do something about this. From the German standpoint, the Austrians simply saying, do we have an alliance or do we not have an alliance? Germany says, we have an alliance. Under this circumstance, we will give you the blank check. Whatever you do is okay with us. Whatever you do, we will support you. That does imply that if they end up in a wider war, that Germany will come in as well. That doesn't mean that Germany's planning on this war. But on the other hand, it does make it possible for the war to become bigger. Well, I do teach the World War I class, and I try not to get into much detail in this class because I'll talk your leg off in the World War I class. Nonetheless, the Serbians know they can't. There's going to be a war. The Serbians know they cannot beat Austria. But then there's Russia. Russia's the big friend. You get picked on by somebody in the neighborhood and you call on Big Brother. In the Balkans, Russia is Big Brother. I talked a little bit about nationalism. There's an issue, of course, which we call Pan-Slavism, where the Slavs have a tendency to believe that even though they're different nationalities, since they have their Slavicness in common, that you should support each other. And a good friend, that's too modern of a map. No, I'm way off here. A good friend of the Serbians is in fact the Russians. The Russians stayed out of the First and Second Balkan Wars. Now the Serbians say, you didn't support us then, you better support us now because we're going to be destroyed. Russia knows that if they mobilize against Austria to defend Serbia, that Germany has to come in. Not only is there an alliance, but as Russia mobilizes its forces along this boundary, that Germany will have to look upon that as a direct threat to them. Russia's mobilization means war. Mobilization, that's when you call out your troops. That's when you send on the new rail system, you send these troops to the borders. Mobilization means that your economy now will have to shift from a peacetime economy into a wartime economy. There are dictums that were used this time frame called mobilization is war, mobilization is the first act of war, and mobilization means war. So if you look at this, everybody knows that if Russia mobilizes, there's going to be a war. The Kaiser in Germany, Kaiser William II, and he's actually related to Nicholas II, the Tsar of Russia. He contacts the Russians saying, you've got to stop. And Russia refuses. When Russia starts to mobilize, we would think that Germany would have to mobilize later. In fact, Germany couldn't possibly not mobilize because then its border would be completely open to any attack by the Russians. What happens is this. Austria's declared mobilization. Russia's declared mobilization. But Germany is not next. It's France. Now, wait a minute. France later claims they started mobilizing to defend themselves against Germany. But you can't defend against somebody who's not threatening you. With Germany without a mobilization is not threatening France. But France will support its ally, obviously against Germany. So we got Russia mobilizing, France mobilization. Shortly thereafter, Germany declares mobilization. Okay. Well, France mobilized next. I have it up here. Germany mobilizes later. It's not that much later. It's literally a matter of hours. Okay. According to international law, you're supposed to declare war on a country before you go to war. Well, there's going to be a war, isn't there? There's going to be a war here. There's going to be a war here. And Germany now is sandwiched. Germany believes that in a war, a lengthy war, it has to lose. You see, Germany has to divide its forces on two fronts. France does not have to do this. Russia doesn't have to do this. Germany believes that in a lengthy war, they'll get squoze. The only way and actually, as it turns out, it takes 4 years, but Germany does get squoze out by 1918, and it does lose the war. Okay, Germany thinks that the only way it can win this war is to win quickly. And if they threw all their weight against the Russians, you can defeat Russian armies, and they do. They're going to, for 3 years during the war, they're going to pound on Russian armies. But how do you defeat Russia? If Russia collapses, yes, and that's what eventually happens. But all Russia would have to do is simply withdraw, pull back a ways, using space for defense, and the Germans would be unable to take them. In fact, as you recall, in 1812, France went all the way and took Moscow and still did not win the war. The only way the Germans believe they can win the war rapidly is not to knock out Russia, that's hard to do, but to knock out France. Hit France, knock France over. So, getting into too much detail. So, let's see if we can get a Schlieffen plan up here. Germans decide that they have to attack France. The idea is this. It's kind of a complicated map. Maybe this is a little bit easier to look at. Here's Germany. Here's France. And France they have their army deployed right here. They have border defenses, very heavy concrete defenses. Germans could try to punch through here, and it's very likely that they are not going to be able to be successful in doing this. How about do a flank run? We can't go through Switzerland, so we've got to cross the Rhine River. Swiss has a very large army. It probably wouldn't work in that direction. How about going through the Low Countries? How about going through the Netherlands? How about going through Belgium and sweeping around and taking Paris? You take Paris, you pretty well got the game. Well, as the plan was worked out, the original plan was to sweep through Holland. The Kaiser decided he ain't going to do that, so they shift and only go through Belgium. Now, Belgium is a neutral country. Belgium is not allied to France. Well, but in a war, is believed by the Germans in a war that Belgium will probably come in on the side of France. One of the reasons for that is that Belgium, you get a map of Belgium here, that Belgium is fortifying its eastern border with Germany, the border over here. It's not fortifying this border with France. So obviously the Belgians think that there's going to be a war, they're going to be fighting Germany. Be that as it may, Belgium is a neutral country. It's not allied to France. And can we say that if you have a reason to invade Belgium, it's for your national defense? Well, yes, you can make that argument. On the other hand, invading a neutral country is inexcusable. I know you can make reasons for it. It is inexcusable. But the Germans thought they had to do it. Well, I'm going to pick on Germany. Germany needs to be picked on here. But let's put this in a larger context. At exactly the same time during the war, that there are economic interests in the Shantung area of China. And the British decide that they're going to take this from Germany. Probably a good idea. In doing so, they take their armies across China. China is neutral. Oh, but wait a minute. I'm sorry. It's only bad if the Germans do it. I'm sorry. So you go across neutral China. That's okay because there's no war. The Chinese don't decide they can't fight the British. But can we say if it's a universal principle, then perhaps the British are not as nice as they ought to be. Let's be really broad. So the Second World War. And look at Operation Torch. Operation Torch was the U.S. invasion of North Africa. The Germans are fighting the British over here from Tunisia and through Libya. Actually, the Germans got as far as Egypt during the Second World War. Well, the Americans joined the war in 1941. By October 1942, they decide that they can come in. They bring a fleet across the North Atlantic, and they're going to support their allies by attacking the Germans in the rear. It's a good idea, except for one problem. Algeria and Morocco are owned by France. France is at peace with the United States. France is being pushed around by Germany, but the United States and France are at peace with each other. The French, if you ask the government, said that Algeria is every much part of France as Paris is. The Algerians disagree, that's a later story. But the United States, therefore, in 1942, sent forces to land on the coast and invade France. Now, the French don't know that this is the right thing to do. In fact, the French forces in Africa resist, and they shoot up a bunch of Americans if, men are killed, those kind of things. But wait a minute. The United States, therefore, is invading a neutral country. That's okay because we needed to do that for defense and to win the war. Yeah, but once again, is it just wrong because somebody else does it? It's right if we do it. So these things do get tricky as you look at the entire scope of history. Well, I still think Germany did the wrong thing. They should not have done this. And I still think it was a disgrace to their country, and it has very serious consequences. You see, Britain has an alliance with Russia and France. But they're not sure they're going to come in and support the war. However, Britain doesn't want a nation, in this case Germany, to totally dominate the continent of Europe. If Germany wins this war against France, they will. They'll be the dominant power. And Britain likes it the way it is. Powerful Germany, powerful France. However, when Germany invades Belgium, then there's another factor involved. Britain comes in with the idea that we are going to be we're going to defend the rights of a neutral nation. There's nothing wrong with that. That's very nice. But can we say there are broader issues involved? There probably are. Nonetheless, this is the reason or the excuse why Britain comes in. Germany declares war on France on August 3rd. On August 4th, they invade. The German army sweeps through Belgium. The Belgian army puts up a good show, but they can't stop the Germans. Let's go back to the Schlieffen Plan. And Germany pushes way into France before they're stopped at the Battle of the Marne. Boy, I'm bad today. So I can give you some maps of what's happening here. Images probably isn't the best because the images are quite gut-wrenching. How about we go to maps? I want to show you the fronts. Not easy to do so with these maps. Try one other, Western Front. Western Front. Okay. Initially, we'll switch to a good map here. How about this one? Maybe it's too detailed. Maybe that one's a little less detailed. Well, you see, Germany knocks out Belgium almost entirely. They occupy Luxembourg, and they push deep into France. They never reach Paris. The French are able to defeat them right here in the Battle of the Marne. So we set up a static system here, which is about 475 miles. For 4 years, this thing is going to be one of the most contested areas on the planet. The other areas, the Eastern Front, the Southern Front, the Balkan Front, the Middle East is going to be fighting as well. This is a world war. Even the Japanese are going to be fighting German interests in the Pacific Ocean. So we're going to fight this in many places. This is a world war. And I'm not going to turn this into a military history course, but let me talk a little bit about the nature of the fighting. Sometimes British call the World War, the First World War, the Great War. Americans tend to call it the First World War or World War I. The time frame, it was called either the Great War, the World War. They're only going to call it the First World War after we have a Second World War. But let's look at what happened in the Great War and ask the question of human progress. Some people are going to take a look at this and say, oh, we are belief in ourselves. It's very nice. We believe in ourselves. We're good people. People don't do bad things. Like you don't wake up one morning and take all your young men out and kill them. That's exactly what they do. Societies tend to be optimistic. We're good. We got parliamentary democracy almost everywhere, even back where Russia has a parliament now. We're expanding voting rights, industrialization is making life better, and we are just better people. However, when you have the Great War and you have this enormous military slaughter, in reality, we have to question human progress. Are our institutions that good? Are our churches that good? Are our religions that good? Are our societies that good when we can allow this kind of thing to take place? We still question, to a certain extent, human progress. Anyway, can we say this is one of the worst fought wars in history? I would agree with that. And I have it right up here, military stupidity. And the men are slaughtered. I'm going to use France as an example. This is probably unfair. because I could pick on the Russians or the Austrians or the Germans, even the Americans. But there have been more books written about what the Germans were doing, the French were doing, as far as military stupidity is concerned, than the others. Though I'm going to say that virtually every nation that was involved, I should have mentioned Italy as well, that virtually every nation involved did things in a very, very stupid manner. France has this idea, and this is true of many other countries as well. But France has an idea that the best way to defeat your enemy is going to attack. This shows you resourcefulness, it shows you courage. It shows, in effect, that your men are just that good. They haven't read the books about the Civil War. Now, the American Civil War is using very crude weapons. Civil War, you can use a musket. If you're very, very good at it, loading and firing this thing, you can fire maybe 3 rounds a minute. You can't maintain that, but you can do it for a little while. The Maxim machine gun will fire 10 rounds a second. The Americans are using a very slow rate fire, and even at that, they do not have the ability to take the offense. The last years of the war, primarily the siege of Petersburg, the siege of Atlanta, they dig trenches, because if you attack, you simply can't break through. You will be shot down. And the weapons in the First World War are ever so much more effective. Can't you look at what happened in the Civil War and realize that, wait a minute, weaponry is going to keep you from attacking. But the French start thinking that it's defeatist. If you stand back waiting for the enemy to attack, even if you dig in, it's somewhat unwise. See, the courage of France, the determination of the French. They believe, and I think they're misreading history, but they believe that the nation, the army that's most determined to attack, will win. They've even run out these little mathematical models. For example, let's say there's Germans standing over here, and they have their rifles. These are Mauser rifles, and oh heavens, you can fire these things as fast as you can remove the bolt. And quite frankly, you can fire these things around every second or two. Once again, it's hard to maintain, but you can do that for a brief period of time. And the French do the mathematical calculations, given distance, the French are running, the Germans start firing, and they will, of course, you'll lose Frenchmen, men will die. There's no doubt about that at all. But the determination will be able to break through, because the Germans will not be able to withstand the courage and the manpower of the French. Now, one of the problems in this mathematical models, which were really fallacious, is they're assuming the Germans are going to stand up. Well, why would you stand up and be killed? How about lay on the ground? You can still manipulate your weapon even more effectively on the ground than you can standing up. That makes your target quite a bit smaller, which means that the French are going to have a harder time shooting you down. It's based on stupidity. It's based on wishful thinking. So France, in Elan, this is their idea of a movement attack or courage. Elan will win the day. The French will always win. If you are aggressive enough, you just simply overwhelm your enemies. The draft age in France is 21. Of course, the men are 21 years of age are all in the military if you're physically able. Of course, soon after the war starts, they draft everybody who's 20. Then they draft everybody who's 19. Then they draft every man who's 18. Finally, by 1916, they're drafting all the 17-year-olds. So we're down into the teenagers. So this is essentially kind of a starting age for most of the French. And the men who are called out of reserves now, up to about age 34, are the men who are actually initially engaged in combat. The United States has not paid the price of a ground war since the Civil War. Both in the case of the First and Second World Wars, we came in late enough that most of the slaughter had already taken place. Though many men are killed, I'm not denying that at all, we do not pay the enormous price, as was paid by the other powers in either the First World War or the Second World War. Looking at 1914, the men that are initially deployed into combat, aged 21 to 34, by the end of the war, half of those men are killed. The other half are maimed. This is either psychological damage, this is physical damage, you're blind, you're missing an arm, you're missing a leg, you're missing both arms, missing both legs. Yeah, there are a few people, and usually these men have been injured more than once, that do survive relatively intact. But in a broad sense, we can say virtually half these men are killed and half are maimed. Let's try to put this in perspective. During the Vietnam War, the United States went over the mark of 200 million population in 1967. I'm not exactly sure what the population of the United States is right now, so probably like 300, 315, 320 million. But during the Vietnam War, the population of the United States is roughly 200 million. And let's say that we lost proportionally in Vietnam as many men as France lost in the First World War. And I don't know how many of you have been to Washington, D.C. If you haven't been, you should go. If you've been, you should go again. The place is absolutely fascinating. I used to live there, went to graduate school there, worked there. It's really a wonderful experience. Well, the museums are free and the monuments are free. One of the more gut-wrenching monuments, actually, the Vietnam War Memorial. It's really quite large. What the government decided to do was to place all the names of men who died in Vietnam there. About 58,000 names. That's a lot of men. I have good friends. Their names are on that wall. Some very good friends were killed. It's personal. It's very, very painful. Nonetheless, I find it moving. I've been there a number of times. Those people, the names, and those of you who've been there, might want to agree with me. The thing is about 1/4 of a mile long, and it starts out maybe 3 feet above the ground, and it goes up to a central corner. It's about 10 feet high, and it has to be very big, 58,000 names. 1/4 of a mile long. If we lost as many men proportionally in Vietnam as the French lost in the First World War, it would have to be at least, and we decide to make a wall to put all the names on it, it would have to at least be 150 times, and sometimes I've calculated even higher than that, 150 times as many men that were proportionally killed in Vietnam. If you take 1/4 of a mile long wall and multiply it by 150 times, that's a considerable thing. My goodness, if 150 times 10 feet, you are way up. In fact, airplanes might have trouble flying over it. It would extend literally for miles. That gives you an idea as to the slaughter involved. The population of France was about 40 million at the beginning of the war in 1914. By the end of the war, we're down to about 37 million. Once again, why would there be such a drop? About 1.5 million were killed. But there's also about 1.5 million babies that were not born because daddy is either dead or he is at the front and he's not going to start a family. So the birth rates drop, and also the number of people drop simply because of the dead. And of the surviving, this 37 million, about 1.3 million have been maimed. So the population of France would now be what? What would that be? See if I can subtract that. It'd be 35 million, 35.5 million people that are alive and whole. This is a slaughter on a huge scale. In picking on France, the actual casualty rates in Austria were higher. There were many more men killed that were Germans. At least 1.8 million, if not 2 million men were killed. Happened to be Germans. Almost the same number of Russians. Now, since Germany had a larger population at this time frame, the actual percentages of people killed in the war is somewhat lower. But even at that, we're talking about an enormous slaughter. Well, let's take a look at attrition in total war. Total war means you make war on the totality of your enemy, not just knockout armies. You make war on the ability of your army to fight. This is very early in its development, but by the end of the war, by 1918, we find a very early version of strategic bombing. We actually have bombers flying over enemy territory, dropping a few bombs on bridges and ships and rail centers, trying to hurt the infrastructure of the nation. Usually when we talk about the total war in this respect, we're talking about a blockade. And Germany cannot feed itself. It simply has not enough agriculture for its population. So it has to import foodstuffs. And Britain places a blockade, a naval blockade on all of Germany. So Germany gets hungry and hungry, and by 1918, they're actually starting to starve. Is this making war on the totality of your nation? Yeah. The army is going to be maintained. They get first priority in food. I'm not saying the German soldiers aren't ever hungry, because they are. But I am going to say that if there's food available, it ends up in the hands of the army, the military, and in vital industries, where you have to have workers who can produce what's needed for the war effort. One of the reasons why Germany collapses, I think is perhaps the main reason, is the blockade became quite effective. Now, this is actually illegal according to international law. The British blockade legally can only blockade material that can be used for war. It is not supposed to be able to blockade for food. However, once again, it's a military necessity means that law is, shall we say, out the window. Attrition. If you can't win a war, excuse me, if you can't win the war on the basis of wiping out your enemy and destroying armies, maybe you can bleed them to death. This is actually done to a certain extent in other wars. For example, in the American Civil War, one of the main reasons why the South loses is it simply bled to death. It simply runs out of manpower, which it cannot replace. The North can replace their men. So this is going to be for. Since the Allies, the Russians, have an enormous amount of manpower, French and Britain combined have more than the Germans do. French has colonies, France has colonies, and the Allies of Britain, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, bring their manpower to bear as well. So the Western Allies, France, Britain, and Russia, have a lot more manpower than Germany and Austria combined. Even if you're losing more men than the Germans are, eventually the Germans will run out of manpower. Once again, that is a major reason why the Germans began to collapse in 1918. I want to bring this a little bit closer to home. For some reason, this is stuck in my craw ever since I was in junior high school, that we tend to overlook what this was about. One of the reasons why I think we sometimes, nations can sometimes go to war is they forget how awful they were and forget exactly the human toll. And I'm trying to demonstrate that a little bit by talking about the losses. But let's talk about some of the battles. And these end up being battles of attrition. And they also show the kinds of things that can happen when you go to war. Let's look at Verdun. Verdun, can I get you a map here? I guess it doesn't really matter. Let's find you a map of the war. Verdun is right over here. In 1916, the German High Command decides that they're going to attack Verdun. Well, why? The reason for this is that the French are aggressive, and the French like Verdun. Verdun is well fortified. We don't have to take Verdun. All we have to do is just simply attack Verdun, and the French will waste themselves by throwing their men in this elan, continue to attack, throw themselves into this maelstrom. The Germans have more heavy artillery. We'll simply use artillery and blast them away. So we'll bleed them to death. This is a battle of attrition. This is not necessary to take territory. This is to threaten France, so France will commit suicide. What happens is this. I would like to, good God. I've been to Verdun. It's one of the most disturbing experiences of my life. The ossuary. The major fighting in Verdun takes place from February through June of 1916. But the battle, even though on a smaller scale, also takes place until December. So it's literally a 10-month battle. And we find Fort Douaumont. It's in the center of the battlefield. See if I can find it here. Here is a photograph of Fort Douaumont before the battle. This is a same place, slightly different angle. An aerial photograph of Douaumont after the bombardment. The area is literally obliterated. The concentration of artillery is so huge that even though France would very much like to regain this area for agriculture, the soil is so poisoned, the topsoil is so obliterated that the French have just simply left it. There were villages at the area. It's the same photograph more or less. There are villages in the area that are literally obliterated. There's not even rubble. I've been there, just literally nothing. It's literally not even one stone on top of each other. You can imagine what it would like to be a human being in this mess. Literally shot to pieces. When I started reading about this, when I was junior high school, like 55 years ago, they were still debating how many men actually were casualties at Verdun. And there were historians are saying that it was over 1 million, this German and French. And more recently, the numbers have been pared down. Now we're usually talking about 380,000 Frenchmen and 350,000 Germans. This is killed and wounded. Well, this area was so obliterated that they couldn't take off the bodies. And even as late as the 1960s, they were finding a body on the battlefield on the average about once a week. They didn't know if these people were French. They didn't know if they were Germans. And there is a very large cemetery, you can see. There's cemeteries all over the place, however. The battlefield is actually on a ridgeline. If you simply go down off the ridgeline toward the city itself of Verdun, you see cemetery after cemetery after cemetery. This is where many of the French are buried. And on the cross it says, Mort pour la France, died for France, which is clearly the case. The ossuary is, as you can see over here, they have a very large, I believe 18,000. There's a very large number of men that are buried here. The ossuary, and ossuary, as you know, means bone. And I've been there twice. It is very, very disturbing. You can walk up in the tower. It's nice stairs. Get up the top and get a nice view of the battlefield. If you go along here, you can see there's windows here. There's windows that are high that kind of catch the light. But around the side of this, as I recall, this is the front of it. But mostly around the back, they have these small windows. And the windows actually look down into into these crypts that are full of human bones. When they found these bodies, they didn't know they're German, they didn't know they're French. They simply took them and threw them in. And room after room after room. It's believed there's well over 100,000 men here. And this is what you see looking through the windows. I'm technically challenged. I didn't have my smartphone with me at the time. I didn't really know how to use it as far as taking photographs are concerned. So I'm relying on what is on the internet. You look through these windows, and this is what you see. These are human beings. They're totally slaughtered. My memory's not as good as I'd like it to be, but sometimes in looking at the skulls, you see skulls that they're missing their teeth. Obviously, the mouth was smashed. What I don't know is were they smashed before or after the man was dead. I would hope that it was after they were dead, but more likely when they were still alive. You take a look at some of the skulls, and it's just like almost like a surgeon tore the skull open. And you go for crypt after crypt after crypt. You see, you go to Gettysburg, and I've been to a number of Civil War battlefields. Fascinating. I urge you to go. Very fortunately, I've been to some other battlefields as well. You go to Gettysburg, and it's like manicured lawn. There is a cemetery there, the Union Cemetery. Thousands of men are buried there. Very nice, neat rows. You go to Little Bighorn. There's a cemetery there. Most of the men who were killed at the cemetery, killed Little Bighorn, not in a cemetery, they're in a burial mound. My latest research is on the Battle of Little Bighorn, so I've been up there a number of times. And they have tour guides, and there's one guy who teaches high school. He's making jokes. Oh, this is funny. Over 260 cavalrymen died there. Over 40 Indians died there. 300 human beings died there, and that's not funny. I never said anything to the man, but I said, I'm walking away from this. I can't take that. I went to the side of the Battle of New Orleans. The tour guide there is making with the jokes as well. A couple thousand men died there. It's not funny. Maybe I'm too sensitive. But you go to these battlefields and you don't see it. You go here and you're not making jokes. My French is bad. But as you walk into the ossuary, they have these signs up. And it says something like this. This is a shrine in the honor of the nation of France. You will conduct yourself in an appropriate manner or you will be thrown out. When you think about human progress, when you think about human decency, don't look past Verdun. Well, this is a big deal between the Germans and the French. In fact, it can be argued that you will never understand modern France until you understand the Battle of Verdun. Let's look at the Battle of the Somme. France is being pressured at the Somme. At Verdun. And they tell the British, you're allies, so you got to take pressure off of us. And Britain has been building this army for 2 years. And really, what they decide to do, they're simply going to blast their way through the German positions. They shell the German position for 1 week. In fact, the German positions are so badly scarred that you can't even see the German trenches anymore. The British High Command says, well, there's no chance. There's nobody there. They line their men up. This is on July 1st, 1916. You line these men up. You get them literally shoulder to shoulder. You have 60-pound backpacks on their back because you want to carry equipment across no man's land. And these men really would have difficulty running with that much weight on them. They want these men lined up for the simple reason that you keep organization better. There's no Germans. There can't be any Germans. So they get their men up and start walking. But there are Germans there. They're in their holes. In fact, some of these are like 15 meters deep. Yeah, they're shocked around, but they're still there. So they crawl up. And we believe maybe 100 machine guns were manned. The British attacked on the morning of July 1st with 100,000 men in the initial attack. By the time the sun went down, 60,000 had been killed or wounded. The Germans just simply slaughtered them, just simply mowed them down, largely with machine guns. Oh my God. See, we fight wars today, and sometimes in our wars, go to Korea and Vietnam, it takes a year or better to lose that many men. And the British lose that many men in a matter of hours. Stupidity. You keep on hammering. You've done this thing, well, just keep on doing it again. The British High Command keeps on saying, well, it might work next time. So they keep on pounding the German positions. They pound the German positions until November, until the weather gets too bad to continue. And at that point, the British have lost over 450,000 men. At the same time, same battle the French are fighting, they've lost 200,000 men. So the Allies have lost 600 to 650,000 men. The Germans about 400,000. This is the costliest battle of the First World War. At least 1 million, if not 1,100,000 to 200,000 men dead for a few lousy miles of worthless ground. This is military stupidity. Well, I'm going over, and I apologize for that. I would like to continue with this. You see, there's a few other things which I want to address, and then we'll go talk about the peace. In the meantime, wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, I hope you're having a great day, and I hope you're having a lot of fun. And buy all the toilet paper you can, because apparently that's much in demand. Appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Figure out how to stop this.